episode, we'll be examining two significant reports released in recent months that offer valuable insights into global counterterrorism efforts. On December 11, 2024, the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Counterterrorism announced its future of U.S. counterterrorism policy, providing a comprehensive framework for the nation's approach to combating terrorism. This announcement is accompanied by the release of the 2023 Country Reports on Terrorism, which offer in-depth analysis of terrorist groups and activities worldwide. Concurrently, the United Nations Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee has issued a crucial report titled Trend Tracker: Evolving Trends in the Financing of Foreign Terrorist Fighters, Activity 2024. This report highlights key developments in the financing of foreign terrorist fighters, providing essential information on the global threat landscape. In this episode, we'll delve into these reports and explore their findings. We'll also examine the recent disbandment of Jamaat Islamiyah, a significant terrorist organization that has been a major concern for international security forces. As we navigate this complex topic, it's essential to acknowledge the severity of counterterrorism efforts. While the subject matter can be heavy, it's crucial to stay informed and vigilant about the challenges we face in this area. Remember, always stay safe.
All right, so let's dive into something that's always in the news.
Yeah.
Right, but rarely explained well. Counterterrorism.
Yeah,
We're going way beyond just, the headlines today.
definitely.
Using some pretty interesting new reports from the U.S. government and the UN. Plus,
Right.
this really intriguing case study
All right.
about a group that actually disbanded.
Wow. So what we've got is kind of a real-time snapshot, I think,
Yeah.
of how counterterrorism is evolving right now.
Uh-huh.
So the U.S. government just released this new policy blueprint
Okay.
called The Future of U.S. Counterterrorism Policy.
Mm-hmm.
And they put that out alongside their Country Reports on Terrorism 2023.
Okay.
And these reports give us a lot of concrete data
Okay.
on what the current threats and trends are.
So it's like a State of the Union, but
Yeah.
for counterterrorism.
Exactly.
But probably with a lot more acronyms.
You are not wrong.
All right.
There are a lot of acronyms. But acronyms aside, these reports, together with the latest from the UN's Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate,
Oh,
or
Bolton.
SEATED,
That's a mouthful.
it is.
Okay, feed
They offer kind of a multifaceted view of the situation, right? So you see the U.S. kind of laying out its strategy,
Uh-huh.
the UN pushing for this global collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
and then this total curveball case of Jamaat Islamiyah,
Okay.
which is a Southeast Asian terrorist group
Yeah.
that chose to disband.
I'm hooked already. Let's unpack the U.S. policy shift first.
Sure.
What's the headline?
So the headline is, it's a move away from those large-scale military interventions
Okay.
that really defined the war on terror era, right?
Yeah.
And towards a more nuanced approach. The new policy is emphasizing addressing what they call root causes,
Okay.
like poverty, discrimination, lack of opportunity,
Yeah.
the very things that make people vulnerable to extremist recruitment in the first place.
So it's not just about drone strikes anymore. It's about tackling those underlying issues that actually breed extremism to begin with.
Exactly.
But how do they plan to do that?
So collaboration is really key here,
Okay.
both domestically and internationally.
Got it.
So they're talking about partnering with local communities to build resilience,
Uh-huh.
working with tech companies to counter online radicalization, and strengthening partnerships with other countries,
Right.
share intelligence and coordinate strategies.
So it sounds like a pretty big shift in thinking.
It is.
But those country reports on terrorism for 2023,
Yes,
those paint a pretty sobering picture
they do.
of the threats that we're actually facing.
Absolutely.
Right.
The report details this persistent threat from ISIS,
Uh-huh.
despite their territorial losses.
Yeah.
And it also highlights this really alarming rise of what's called racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism,
Okay.
or REMVE for short.
REMVE. All right.
Yeah, so think of it as kind of a catch-all term
Uh-huh.
for groups that are fueled by hate based on race or ethnicity.
Got it. I've definitely seen that acronym popping up more and more.
Yeah.
Is this mainly a U.S. problem?
Uh-huh.
Or does it have global implications?
Unfortunately, it's both.
Oh, okay.
The report really emphasizes how these REMVE networks are
Yeah.
increasingly transnational.
Yeah.
They're connecting online,
Mhm.
sharing tactics,
Yeah.
and even inspiring attacks cross borders.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
So the U.S. is shifting its approach,
Right.
but the threats themselves are becoming even more complex
Yeah.
and interconnected.
Hmm.
So where does the UN's perspective
Right.
fit into all of this?
So the UN seated is really hammering home this message of collaboration,
Okay.
especially on issues that require a global response.
Like
So things like dealing with returning foreign terrorist fighters,
Uh-huh.
combating online radicalization,
Right.
but without violating human rights,
Yeah.
and, navigating that really tricky balance
Yeah.
between security measures and individual freedoms.
So it sounds like they're walking kind of a tightrope,
They are.
trying to address these threats
Yeah,
effectively without compromising those fundamental values.
exactly. And they're urging member states to go beyond this purely security-driven approach
Right.
and to really invest in things like promoting tolerance, addressing inequalities,
That right?
and empowering communities to resist those extremist narratives.
So which brings us to that fascinating outlier you mentioned,
Yes.
Jamaat Islamiyah,
Mm-hmm.
a terrorist group voluntarily disbanding.
It's crazy.
That's almost unheard of.
It's truly a unique case.
Yeah.
Reports from the Soufan Center and the Institute for Policy Analysis of Conflict,
Okay.
they detail how JI shifted from violence to a strategy that they called Daqwa first.
Daqwa first.
Oh, yeah. So essentially it means prioritize the spread of their message peacefully
Okay.
over armed conflict.
So instead of bombs and attacks, they focused on outreach and persuasion.
Exacto.
What prompted such a dramatic shift?
It was a combination of factors,
Okay.
including internal debates
Huh.
about the effectiveness and the morality of violence,
Go.
disillusionment with their previous tactics,
Mhm.
and crucially, a willingness on the part of the Indonesian government to engage in dialogue.
Wait, so the government actually talked to this terrorist group?
They did.
That seems risky.
It was risky,
Yeah.
but it ultimately proved to be effective.
Yeah.
So the Indonesian authorities, while condemning JI's ideology and past actions,
Wow.
recognized that dialogue could be a powerful tool
Yeah.
in certain circumstances.
And JI responded by laying down their arms
They did,
and essentially ceasing to exist
pretty much.
as a cohesive group.
They provided a list of members.
Wow.
They renounced violence,
Mm.
and they agreed to revise the curriculum at their schools
Uh-huh.
to remove extremist content.
That's remarkable.
It is a remarkable story, and one that raises a lot of questions about the potential
Mm-hmm.
and the limitations
Yeah.
of dialogue as a counterterrorism strategy.
Okay, so we've got this policy shift in the U.S.,
Yeah.
this call for collaboration from the UN,
Right.
and this intriguing case study in Indonesia.
Yes.
It's clear that the world of counterterrorism is changing
It is.
rapidly.
Yes.
But before we get too overwhelmed,
Okay.
I want to dig a little deeper into some of the specifics.
Sure.
Starting with that U.S. policy shift.
Right.
What are the concrete changes
Okay.
that they're proposing?
Mhm.
And how might they impact the fight against terrorism both at home and abroad?
That's a great question and one that deserves a closer look.
Okay.
So the new policy document lays out a number of key initiatives, including a focus on strengthening partnerships with civil society organizations.
Okay.
So that means working more closely with groups
Wow.
that are already embedded in communities
Yeah.
and can help identify warning signs
Right.
of radicalization,
Right.
or offer support to individuals who might be vulnerable to recruitment.
So it's like building a network of early responders almost.
Exactly.
People who can intervene
Yeah.
before someone goes down the path of violence.
That's the idea.
Okay.
And the policy also emphasizes investing in programs
Mm-hmm.
that address the root causes of extremism.
Okay. So what does that mean?
So this means tackling things like poverty,
Right.
discrimination,
Yeah.
lack of educational opportunities,
Yeah.
and political marginalization.
All right.
All of those factors.
All those factors
Yeah,
that can create fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root.
exactly.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're desperate
Mm-hmm.
and you feel like you have no voice,
Yeah,
you're more likely to be attracted to a group
right.
that offers you a sense of belonging and purpose,
Yeah,
even if it's, a twisted one.
that's precisely the point.
Okay.
And the U.S. government is recognizing that
Mm-hmm.
these traditional counterterrorism approaches, that heavy reliance on military force and intelligence gathering,
Right.
they haven't been sufficient
Okay.
to address these underlying drivers of extremism.
But this policy also acknowledges the continuing threat
Yes,
posed by groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda.
absolutely.
How are they planning to deal with those more traditional terrorist networks?
So the policy stresses the importance of continuing to disrupt and degrade these groups' capabilities
Okay.
through a combination of military operations,
Hmm.
intelligence sharing,
Yeah.
and financial sanctions.
Okay.
But they're also recognizing the need to adapt
Right.
to the evolving tactics
Yeah.
of these groups.
And one of the biggest evolutions is the internet.
Oh, absolutely.
For
Yeah.
recruitment,
Yeah.
propaganda,
Uh-huh.
and even planning attacks, it's become a virtual battleground
Right.
in the fight against terrorism.
So the U.S. policy is emphasizing the need to work with these tech companies.
Yes.
To develop ways to counter terrorist content online.
And also respecting freedom of speech.
Exactly. It's a tough balance to strike.
That sounds like a tricky balance.
It is.
But what about the role of other countries?
Yeah.
The UN CTID is pushing for this global collaboration.
Right.
But are nations actually working together effectively on this?
So the country reports on terrorism for 2023
Yeah.
actually offer some encouraging examples
Okay.
of international cooperation.
Like what?
For instance, the report mentions the Global Counterterrorism Forum,
Okay.
or GCTF.
GCTF. All right.
Yeah. And that brings together countries from
Right.
around the world
But
to share best practices
Oh.
and coordinate strategies
Got it.
on a range of counterterrorism issues.
And you mentioned earlier that the report also highlighted
Yeah.
the alarming rise of REMVE,
Mhm.
that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism.
Right.
Is the GCTF doing anything
They are.
to address that specific threat?
Yes. They've actually established a dedicated working group
Wow, okay.
focused on countering REMVE. Okay.
Recognizing the need for a global response
Yeah.
to this increasingly transnational threat.
So countries are sharing intelligence
Right.
and strategies
Yes.
to try to get ahead of these groups
Exactly.
before they can carry out attacks.
That's the goal.
That sounds promising.
It is encouraging.
But what about the role of communities?
Yeah.
Can ordinary citizens really make a difference?
You know, I think they can.
Okay.
Both the U.S. policy and the UN's CTED
Mm-hmm.
emphasize this crucial role of communities
Okay.
in preventing and countering extremism.
All right.
The logic is that communities are often the first line of defense.
Right?
They're the ones who can spot the warning signs,
Yeah.
intervene early,
Mm-hmm.
and offer support
Okay.
to individuals who might be vulnerable to recruitment.
So it's about empowering communities to take ownership of their own
Yes.
security
Exactly.
and to build resilience against those extremist narratives.
That's right.
But how do you actually do that? So the reports highlight a range of approaches,
Okay.
from supporting community-led initiatives to promoting interfaith dialogue
Okay.
to providing training to teachers and social workers on how to identify and address signs of radicalization.
So it sounds like a multifaceted approach,
It is.
recognizing that there's no single solution
Right.
to this really complex problem.
Exactly.
But let's go back to that intriguing case
Yeah.
of Jamaat Islamiyah for a
Okay.
moment. Their voluntary disbandment.
Right.
It's fascinating.
It is.
Would that model offer any lessons
Well,
for other counterterrorism efforts?
it's tempting to look at JI's story and think, well, if they can do it, why can't others?
Right.
But it's important to remember
Yeah.
that their decision to disband was the result of a very specific set of circumstances. Their evolving strategy, their internal divisions,
Right.
a willingness to engage in dialogue with the Indonesian government,
Right.
and a political context that allowed for some degree of accommodation.
So you're saying it's not a one-size-fits-all solution,
Right.
but there are still valuable lessons to be learned
Absolutely.
from their experience.
Yes.
Okay.
For one thing, JI's story highlights the potential power of dialogue,
Okay.
even with groups that have committed horrific acts in the past.
Yeah.
And it underscores the importance of understanding the motivations and grievances of these extremist groups.
Okay.
What drives them?
Yeah.
What are their goals?
Mhm.
And are there any points of potential leverage?
And this ties back to the U.S. policy shift, right?
does.
The emphasis on addressing those root causes of extremism
Yeah.
is essentially an acknowledgement
Right.
that military force alone can't solve this problem.
Exactly.
We need to understand the
Yeah.
underlying factors
Mhm.
that make extremism appealing to begin with.
Precisely.
Okay.
And while dialogue and engagement should never be seen as condoning or excusing violence,
Right.
they can, in certain circumstances, be effective tools for reducing violence,
Okay.
disrupting terrorist networks, and ultimately saving lives.
So we've got this complex interplay of factors.
We do.
The evolving tactics of terrorist groups,
Yeah.
the shift in U.S. policy, the UN's call for global collaboration, and the potential, albeit limited, role of dialogue.
Right.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is complex.
But I think you've done a fantastic job
Oh, well, thank you.
of connecting the dots and making sense of it all.
I think it's crucial to have these conversations,
Yeah.
to unpack these complexities and to challenge assumptions. Because
Right.
the more we understand about this issue,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to advocate for effective policies,
Right.
to support initiatives that are making a difference,
Right.
and to resist simplistic solutions
Oh,
that might do more harm than good.
Couldn't agree more.
Good.
Now, we've talked a lot about the big picture,
Yeah.
the global trends and the policy shifts. But I'm curious to hear about some of the specific programs and initiatives that are actually making a difference on the ground. You mentioned the GCTF's work on countering REMVE.
Yeah.
Are there any other examples
Absolutely.
that stand out to you?
There are some incredibly inspiring initiatives happening all over the world.
Like, give me an example.
For instance, the Strong Cities Network
Okay.
is a global network of cities that are sharing best practices and developing innovative approaches to preventing and countering extremism
Okay.
at the local level.
Cities taking the lead.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
it is.
Tell me more about what they're doing.
Well, they're recognizing that cities are often on the front lines of this challenge, dealing with issues like social cohesion,
Right.
integration of immigrant communities, and addressing the needs of marginalized youth, and they're coming up with creative solutions.
Like, what? Give me an example.
So, for instance, the city of Oslo in Norway has developed a program called Exit,
Okay.
which provides support and counseling to individuals who want to leave extremist groups.
So people who are already in extremist groups.
Yes.
Okay.
It's based on the recognition that people can change,
Right.
and that even those who have been involved in violence can be rehabilitated
Okay.
and reintegrated into society.
That's a really hopeful story.
It is.
So it's not just about punishment and detention.
Right.
It's about offering a path out
Yeah,
for those who are willing to disengage from extremism.
exactly.
Right.
And there are similar programs popping up in cities all over the world,
Oh, wow.
from London to Montreal to Jakarta.
So it's a growing recognition
It is.
that we need a more holistic approach
Yes.
to counterterrorism,
Mm-hmm.
one that combines those security measures
Yeah.
with efforts to address the root causes of extremism,
Uh-huh.
to promote dialogue and understanding,
Right.
and to offer pathways for rehabilitation and reintegration.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so we've got these global policy shifts,
Yeah.
international collaboration, community-based initiatives,
Right.
and cities taking the lead on these innovative approaches. It feels like there's a lot of energy and momentum building
Or agree.
around this issue.
And while the challenges are immense,
Yeah.
the fact that so many people are working on this, that there's so much innovation and collaboration happening, it gives me a sense of hope.
Hope is a good thing to hold on to,
It is.
especially when dealing with a topic
Yeah.
as complex and often as disheartening as counterterrorism.
Right.
But before we get too carried away with optimism,
Okay.
I think we need to circle back to one crucial question
Right.
that's been looming over our entire conversation.
Okay.
Remember that report
Mm-hmm.
from the International Center for Counterterrorism,
Yes.
the ICCT, about the potential implications of a second Trump presidency?
Yes, that's definitely a wild card
Right.
in this whole equation.
And one that could potentially upend a lot of the progress
Potentially.
that's been made in recent years.
The report analyzes Trump's previous approach to counterterrorism
Right.
and highlights some key areas of concern.
Like
His tendency to prioritize personal relationships
Okay.
over institutional expertise,
Right.
his skepticism of multilateral institutions like the UN,
Uh-huh.
his willingness to make unpredictable decisions.
Yeah.
All of these factors raise questions about how he might approach counterterrorism
Okay.
in a second term.
Right. And the report even suggests
It does.
that he might be tempted to revert to some of the more heavy-handed tactics
Yes.
of the War on Terror era.
That's a real possibility.
Okay.
And it would be a stark contrast to the more nuanced collaborative approach that's being advocated for by the current administration and the UN.
So we're left with this big question mark.
We are.
Hanging over everything we've discussed.
It's a big one.
The future of counterterrorism is uncertain.
Yeah.
And it's going to be heavily influenced by the political landscape.
For sure.
But before we spiral into a vortex of anxiety about the future, I think we need to take a step back and reflect on what we've learned today.
That's a good idea sometimes, up amidst all the complexity.
Yeah.
It's helpful to pause and distill the key insights.
So what are the biggest takeaways from all of these reports? What should our listeners be thinking about as they navigate this increasingly complex world?
I think there are a few key points that really stand out.
Okay.
First, the nature of terrorism is constantly evolving.
Okay.
We're moving beyond the era of large-scale hierarchical organizations like al-Qaeda and facing a more diffuse, decentralized threat landscape.
So it's not just about hunting down terrorists in caves anymore.
Right.
It's about addressing a much broader spectrum of threats.
Exactly.
Including those coming from online spaces.
Yeah.
And from individuals inspired by extremist ideologies. But not necessarily formally affiliated with any group.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And this shift in the nature of the threat requires a corresponding shift in our counterterrorism strategies.
Okay.
The U.S. policy, the UN's recommendations, even the story of Jamaat Islamiyah, they all point towards the need for a more nuanced, holistic approach.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
It means going beyond a purely security-driven approach.
Okay.
And investing in things like addressing the root causes of extremism, building community resilience, fostering dialogue and understanding, and promoting rehabilitation and reintegration.
So it's not just about stopping attacks. It's about preventing them from happening in the first place.
Exactly.
By creating a world where extremism has less fertile ground to take root.
That's a powerful way to put it.
Okay.
And it requires a collective effort. Governments, international organizations, communities, tech companies, individuals. We all have a role to play.
It's a reminder that even in the face of these complex global challenges, there's agency in understanding the issues and taking action at whatever level we can.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And even small actions can have a ripple effect.
I like that.
Educating ourselves about these issues, engaging in constructive dialogue, supporting organizations that are working to make a difference. These are all things that can contribute to a safer, more resilient world.
It's a call to action.
It is.
But also a message of hope.
Yes.
And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Let's take a moment to process everything we've discussed.
Okay.
And we'll come back in the final part to explore a few more fascinating insights.
Okay, that's good.
From these reports.
All right. So we're back for the final part of our deep dive into counterterrorism.
Yes, we are.
And before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier about the role of cities in tackling extremism.
Right.
It's not something we usually think about. But it makes sense that cities would be at the forefront of this issue.
They are. It's a really fascinating trend and one that's gaining momentum globally.
Okay.
Cities are often kind of these microcosms of the broader challenges we've been discussing, right? Diverse populations, social inequalities, vulnerabilities to extremist recruitment. But they're also these incredible hubs of innovation and creativity. And they're increasingly taking ownership of this issue.
You mentioned Oslo's exit program earlier.
I did.
Which helps people disengage from extremist groups.
Right.
Are there any other examples of cities taking the lead?
Oh, absolutely.
With creative solutions?
Take the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, for example.
Okay.
They've implemented a program that trains barbers to recognize signs of radicalization in young men and to intervene early.
Wow. So, like, the barbers are the first line of defense almost?
Kind of, yeah.
That's amazing.
With support and counseling.
So the idea is that...
Yeah, the idea is that barbershops are often these trusted spaces where young men feel comfortable opening up and sharing their struggles.
That's such a smart approach.
It is.
Meeting people where they are,
right?
Building trust and intervening before they go down a dangerous path.
That's the goal.
That's incredible. Are there any similar initiatives
There are.
Happening in the U.S.
Yes. Actually, the Strong Cities Network that we mentioned before includes a number of U.S. cities.
Oh, okay, like
Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Atlanta.
Wow, okay.
They're all sharing best practices and developing tailored approaches to address the specific challenges they face.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
No, it's not.
Each city has to figure out what works best for its own context and community.
Exactly. There's no silver bullet when it comes to counterterrorism.
We've said that before.
We have.
It requires a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
And cities are playing a crucial role.
They are.
In that effort.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got governments shifting policies, international organizations pushing for collaboration, communities stepping up, and cities becoming these hubs of innovation.
It's a lot happening.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But I'm curious, what about the individual?
Okay.
What role can ordinary citizens play in all this?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
While it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of this challenge, there are things we can all do to contribute to a safer and more resilient world.
So give me some examples. What concrete actions can people take?
Okay, so first and foremost, stay informed. Read these reports. Engage in these conversations and challenge yourself to understand the complexities of this issue.
Right. It all starts with education.
It does.
But it can't just be about passive learning.
Right.
We have to actually do something with that knowledge.
Absolutely. And that's where engagement comes in.
Okay, so how do we engage?
Get involved in your community.
Okay.
Support organizations that are working to prevent radicalization, to promote dialogue, to build bridges across divides.
Okay.
Challenge hateful rhetoric when you see it. Speak up for tolerance and understanding.
It's a reminder that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
They can. And never underestimate the power of hope.
Hope. Yeah.
The world is full of people working tirelessly to counter these threats, to build resilience, and to create a better future.
Okay.
And their efforts, often unseen and unheralded, are making a difference every single day.
I love that as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always a flicker of light.
Exactly. And it's that flicker of light that we need to nurture, to amplify, and to carry forward.
Well, on that inspiring note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It has been a fascinating journey.
I agree. And I want to thank you for being such a brilliant guide.
Well, thank you.
Through this really complex and often unsettling terrain.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
And I encourage everyone listening to continue exploring these issues. To challenge assumptions and to engage in these thoughtful, nuanced conversations about the best way forward.
Okay, so one last time to our amazing listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights.
We do.
And that you'll continue to explore these critical issues until next time.